Welcome to part one of our program planning presentation. This covers material from chapter 6 from our textbook. So my objective for this presentation is to discuss steps 4 and 5 in the achievement-based curriculum development process, and I'll also go over the different learning activities that you'll do to complete the curriculum development project. To me, it seems like when you read chapter 6, there seems to be a missing step, at least the way I develop curriculum over time, and it seems that we have program goals, which as a reminder are the broad goals for the curriculum, what students should be able to do by the end of the curriculum, or the large curriculum would be the entire curriculum for the year or the grade level. The content is specific activities within each program goal. These are typically thought of as units of instruction, chapters, those type of things. We can have several different content areas within each program goal. In fact, when we developed the curriculum for this class, I'm going to limit you on the number of content areas within each program goal. You would have more than, some will have one, some will have several, 6, 7, 8, depending on the type of unit that you're developing or the program goal. And then you have learning objectives or outcomes. Now I'm going to use objectives probably more than outcome, but these are the specific learning objectives or outcomes for each content area. These are the things that we typically write so we know what specific things the student should be able to know by the end of a lesson. This step seems to be missing in our ABC guide. I think it's implied, but it just is not specific enough to me. So I want to make sure that we cover all these areas in this presentation and when we're developing our curriculum. So let's look at it. This step 4, as we'll talk about in a ABC model or in curriculum development, looks sort of like this. We have program goals. Then for each program goal, we have multiple content area. And then for each content area, again, that's a unit, or it's a bigger unit. Then within each content area, we have lesson or learning objectives. And we typically, in our area, PE, we have cognitive, psychomotor, and affective learning objectives. Cognitive, again, is the mental capacity, the knowledge of the material. Psychomotor is the skill, and that's typically where we spend most of our time in PE. And the affective is the attitude of our towards that particular area. We spend most of our time, as I said earlier, in a psychomotor. We spend some time in cognitive and probably not enough time in the affective domain. Let's give an example of this. So if our program goal is physical fitness, some content examples, we have fitness concepts, fitness principles, and fitness strategies. Then we have our learning objectives. I'm not going to provide a learning objective for each one of those content areas. So that's what we're looking at trying to develop in these steps. And then in another textbook that you're not required to purchase, but I reference, is the Rink textbook. So how Dr. Rink puts this is that we have standard level that drives our development for our curriculum, and our national standards are the SHAPE standards right now. And then this brings us to the curricular level, where we have our program goals again. Then we have our unit level, which would be the content. Now with SHAPE, we would talk about grade level outcomes. This would be at the content area, and then we would have the lesson level or the learning objectives. So it's just another way to look at the what we're trying to do in the step 4 of our curriculum design process. So with that said, let's talk about step 4 of the ABC model, and it's titled Delineating Objectives for Each Goal. So we're breaking down each program goal into smaller goals, which we call those content, and then the shape standards, again, we will call that grade level outcomes, and very specific by each grade. They're in a shape book. If you have not purchased that book or downloaded the material that you can get online of the shape standards, I recommend that. It's a very good resource. I know you're required to read it earlier and look at it and review it earlier in this class. So when we have our program goals, we talked about these are the big broad topics. Typically I've asked you to develop these based on the national standards or your state standards. Then our content area are going to be broader terms like tennis, physical fitness, outdoor education, those type of things. And again, the best way to think of these are as units or as chapters or sections for your class. To me, there seems to be a step B that's missing in the book, in our textbook, in the ABC model. So I'm adding this to our assignment. I think it's critical that we do this. Again, I think it's implied because it's shown in the textbook. I don't think it's specific enough excuse me, in our textbook. So when we're writing our learning objectives, these are specific statements that describe what we expect our students will be able to do after instruction. It can be the physical skills, the psychomotor objectives, or it can be the written cognitive type thing, or it can be our affective domain. Again, these should define what the student should learn through our lesson. I expect that each learning objective to be, as we say, as Kelly and Melograno say in their textbook, that it should be stated and observable, means that you can see it, and you should be able to measure this stuff, these outcomes, so that anyone else, not just you, somebody substitute, you have a substitute teacher or your principal, someone else can determine if the student has actually met that particular objective. So it's observable, it's measurable, and anyone who has some kind of skill to assess that learning can determine if the student can achieve it. And the student should be able to know if they have achieved the lesson objective. So let's provide some examples of all this stuff that I'm talking about. So we have a program goal. We have from the shape standard, the physically literate individual demonstrates competency in a variety of motor skills and movement. So our content is an overhand throw. This can be the other way we can look at this is content is it can be by sport. It can be tennis, it can be baseball, or it can be specific, it can be like this, overhand throw. Then we have our example of a student learning outcome or student learning objective. Again, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. The student will be able to throw a ball in an overhead pattern using the preferred hand. The student will throw a 3-inch or a tennis ball at least 50 feet on 2 out of 3 trials while demonstrating the following performance standard. And I wasn't going to go over until that. I'm going to give you another example that I want you to follow for our assignment in our class. So the first thing is to start the learning objective with this phrase. Students will be able to. Again, this tells the student and you what we expect of them. And then I want you to provide the following. After the student will be able to, you need to tell us what is the behavior that is expected from the student. We're going to use different verbs to describe these behaviors. Each of the 3 domains has multiple different verbs that describe the behavior, and there are different verbs for the different levels of our learning. If you've ever taken a class, back maybe you're an undergraduate, or your teacher prep, or your master's program, where we talked about Bloom's taxonomy and the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. At the lower level is just the knowledge base, and it moves all the way up to synthesis and evaluation. And we have different verbs that identify where we are on Bloom's taxonomy. I've provided some information about this in our class that will help you with these verbs and when you're writing learning objectives. So what is that behavior? Such as verbs like apply, kick, throw, values. The verb should describe the thing that you expect the student to do. The condition is the setting that the student will exhibit the behavior. So, for example, throw the baseball 50 feet to a partner. Then the criterion. This is the area that I have found that students, when they're writing objectives, tend to forget and don't add. What is the expected level of performance to demonstrate proficiency? Other way to think about it, what is the level that you expect to do to be master the whatever it is, if it's the skill, if it's a test, those type of things. So is 7 out of 10 good? 70%? Do you expect 90%? And those type of things. So whatever that criteria is that you have. So let me give you an example. Students will be able to pass the volleyball to a front line player from the back line using a legal forearm pass from a ball tossed over the net 8 out of 10 times. So our behavior is performing a forearm pass. So the verb is to pass, so that's psychomotor. Then our condition is the volleyball to a front, the pass to the volley, is taking the toss from from over the net, from the back line to the front line player. Okay, so it's a legal pass over the net. That's the condition. That's the thing that they are doing. This is obviously a psychomotor learning objective. And what's the criterion? How good do they have to be? We said we set the criteria at 8 out of 10 times, or 80%. So they have to be pretty proficient to meet the standard that we have for our students in this particular class. So after you taught the lesson, this is the level that the students should be at after they have practiced. This is not the beginning of the lesson. This is at the end of the lesson, however you do your assessment for your students. But that's another class. This is just developing the curriculum. Assessment's another part of this. So that was step 4, and I added step 4B. Then we have step 5, which is establishing program goals emphasis. This is when we're going to determine the emphasis for each program goal in the entire program curriculum. So how much time should be spent on each program goal and content area? So there's a worksheet and page 326, and there's also an example on page 121 in your textbook that talks about how about doing this. But basically what you do is that you list your content area. Sorry. So as you can see in page 121, what you are asked to do is, if you're doing this for the entire curriculum, K through 12, you will list each goal and provide the weight that you have for each goal, the larger goal across your K-12 curriculum. You could rank how much weight do you have for each one of the goal and the advanced different skills, which we call content area, and then rank it over the time. Now, I'm going to go to our next slide where I'm going to talk about the learning activities for our class and what you're actually going to do. As you can see in class, I've provided you a template for all the learning activities for this module. So in activity 6.1, you're going to take your program goals that you have written. Then for each program goal, you're going to provide 3 specific content areas. Again, as I said earlier in this presentation, you can have more than 3, but I want you to limit it to 3. Again, the purpose of the assignment, the curriculum development project assignment, is to teach you the process of developing an ABC curriculum. But for this assignment, again, you have let's say you have 5 program goals. So you have 3 content areas for each program goal. Then for each content area, this is activity 6.2, you'll develop 3 learning objectives. I want one cognitive, one psychomotor, and one affective for each content area. So there's going to be a lot of objectives. This is the assignment that takes the longest of all the assignments in this particular project. Then in activity 6.3, you're going to use the figure. You're going to develop a table or goal percentage table modeled after figure 6.4 or the worksheet on page 326 of our textbook. And again, I have provided you a template for all this that you can follow to complete these activities in this module. Again, I have a couple more presentations where I'll go over the other activities, but that is just a brief overview of steps 4 and 5 of the ABC model.